Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and ladies and gentlemen, very thankful once again. Want to give a quick shout out to the editor of Behind the Steel Curtain, Jeff Hartman, and of course, a thank you to all of you listeners and supporters who helped make my article number one on Behind the Steel Curtain for yesterday. If you didn't have a chance to go check that out, head on over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, a part or member of SB Nation. That article is the 6 predictions for the Steelers' 2016 defense. A little bit of that coming up again on a future episode when I have Eric Herman of Steelers Grind on to do our dual opinions segment in part 2 of our 2016 predictions. And maybe we may have a part 3 after I was talking to Eric earlier today. We had an odd request, so we may just fill that request yet, but today I had to interrupt the regularly scheduled programming for some unregularly scheduled programming because for those of you who hadn't heard the rumor, I don't even want to say the news or dignified as news because when you hear who said it and what they said, you won't want to believe it's true. And for those of you who did not hear, this all began around almost 4 o'clock on Tuesday when Mark Madden, radio show host via Pittsburgh, not exactly the pride of Pittsburgh, and I'll get to Mark in a few moments, he tweeted out and said, "I am told Lev Bell skipped a drug test and is facing suspension. Right now it's a rumor, but it's a pretty strong rumor." And I do think that just the timing and just knowing the arrogance in the way that Mark Madden operates, I won't say it's a love-hate with Mark Madden, and well, I'll get into that in a second, but just the timing after the city welcomes back their Stanley Cup champions. I hadn't got a chance actually to talk about the Pens because the last time I recorded, of course, part 1 of the 2016 way too early Steelers predictions with Eric of Steelers Grind, we were anticipating that next game in San Jose, and man, was it not cool to see some of the people in San Jose, the Sharks fans who stuck around for Super Mario to lift the cup there at the end. Very awesome. The team, of course, coming back. They weren't allowing fans at the airport, but the parade probably ongoing and over maybe by the time you do end up having an opportunity to listen to this show, and that's okay. Man, the Pens were just awesome. Everybody's just tweeting City of Champions. We're waiting for the Pirates to turn it around. They did actually tonight as I record this with the young man who came back and he had a no-hitter through 6 innings. Not really the big hockey or baseball guy to the point where I could talk about it like I can my Steelers, but Mark Madden's timing just almost deliberate in waiting for the Penguins to return back with that cup before he hit us. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, with Le'Veon Bell skipping a drug test, allegedly skipping a drug test. But nonetheless, Mark Madden putting out this news, drawing attention upon himself. And I'm not really sure that Mark is the type of person. He always comes off to me as something of a shock jock. He's not someone that I feel really cares about his reputation one way or another. If he's the one that can break the news or put the spotlight or focus on himself. And I'm just going to go with some bullet points of multiple reasons why I'm disappointed of hearing this news. Because I am disappointed of hearing this news. I don't want it to be true. We've already gone through this process with Martavis Bryant more than once. We've already gone through this process with Le'Veon Bell once. The Steelers, their fans, Steelers Nation, the whole organization, no one else really wants to deal with any more of this drug and suspension type crap. We've really had our heart wrenched out with multiple young men all throughout maybe the last decade or so, because even when you go back as far as let's say, Ben Roethlisberger with the allegations of rape that had happened when I was talking about that on one of the podcasts a couple weeks ago. And then you had Big Ben also get in a motorcycle accident, and you really wanted this young man to clean up his life after those incidents coming one after the other. And of course, Hines Ward, when people were saying things about a DUI, and there's just all this crazy stuff that was going on. And then you have Le'Veon Bell and LeGarrette Blount. Then you have Martavis Bryant. Then Martavis Bryant again. And it's like, just where does this end? And the first thing I want to say is I would be very disappointed if this were in fact true, that we find out that Le'Veon Bell had been smoking marijuana once again. In fact, was it just possession of marijuana or whatever it was? They had the last time that he got in trouble. This would be the second time. And Le'Veon Bell now is 24 years old, and he's going to be entering a contract year this year. And he's already been injured twice. And speaking with some of my colleagues, like David over at Steelers Sanctuary, and we were talking, and I hope to have David on maybe sometime in the near future. It didn't work out for us tonight. We were actually going to talk about just more than just this Le'Veon Bell allegation, which just happened to be convenient timing because we were talking about whether or not Le'Veon Bell might be a Steeler next year. A lot of people tend to think that Le'Veon Bell is injury prone, despite the fact and the nature of the injuries and the targeting of his legs that has happened. I don't like to say that he is injury prone. He actually came back last season and was just phenomenal before having a helmet taken to his knee by a player that is a known dirty player. And I really wish I could find the right word that wouldn't get me in hot water. I don't know whether you call him a hooligan. Enforcer would be a good word for Vontaze Burfict, who is going to go out there and just do as he pleases without any regard to anyone else's body. We also saw it happen to Max Williams, and we saw it happen to Antonio Brown. So I don't really think that Le'Veon Bell is an injury risk. He could be and should be somebody that should be a lifetime Steeler just based on his performance thus far. But if he happens to continue to get into issues with the substance abuse policy, we saw how the Pittsburgh Steelers jettisoned a former Super Bowl MVP in Santonio Holmes and traded him away, sent him packing and right out the door when he was continuously causing problems. If we remember also, Santonio Holmes, when he was traded, also ended up being suspended for several games to start that season with the Jets. I do believe it was 4 games, but I'd have to go back and look. But this goes back to Le'Veon Bell should know better. It's not as if he hasn't been in the NFL for several years and that he doesn't know the rules or isn't part of the process or isn't aware of how this process works. I want to believe when Le'Veon Bell tells me in an E60 segment on ESPN last year, in speaking with his mother and looking by all intents and purposes to be a mother's boy, he apologizes to his fan base. He claims he has never touched this stuff before. It was his first time and it was a mistake. I want to believe Le'Veon Bell, but where there's smoke, there is fire. When something like this has happened before, and he was arrested and caught with then teammate LeGarrette Blount, and they were charged, I believe Le'Veon was the one who was driving, charged with the DUI and marijuana possession, and that was in August of 2014. So really his hands didn't get slapped till almost a full year later, which is rather unfortunate because he lost some time after getting hurt in the Steelers' final game of the regular season that year on December 29th, when Bell was injured against the Cincinnati Bengals and hyperextended his knee when he was tackled by their safety, Reggie Nelson. It wasn't until later that we found out for 2015 that Bell would be suspended for the first 4 games of the regular season by the league. Now, that suspension was eventually reduced to 3 games by April of last year, and then in July, Bell was able to appeal and have that reduced to 2. So the reason I mention all of this is that the penalty seemed to be as high as 4, and some things did happen in the interim. We did see where someone like Josh Gordon, a player who cannot lay off of the wacky tobacco up in Cleveland, one of the Cleveland Browns, and someone who had a very bright future ahead of him, but of course came out of the supplemental draft because many teams were very leery to take a chance on Josh Gordon, knowing his background and history. And this is where I'm getting at with if a rumor like this would be true, just in the case of Martavis Bryant. The Steelers aren't an organization such as the Dallas Cowboys with Jerry Jones that are willing to put up with this type of behavior by all means necessary and just think they could add someone to the roster and just make it work. The Rooneys have never operated like that. And I would be brokenhearted to see Le'Veon Bell jettisoned from this team. Now, all of this, of course, is much speculation, just like trying to make predictions on who a breakout star or an underachiever might be on the offense or defensive side of the ball for this upcoming season. So I'm just taking it from a perspective of if it were true or if it were false. So don't take this as gospel, folks. I just want to get you thinking about these sorts of things and what could be in Bell's future. Now, does Bell think, would a player like Le'Veon Bell, not necessarily just Le'Veon Bell, but any player think that they could get away with what they got away with? Because the first time the NFL had amended and changed the rules midway through the season. So if you remember, Josh Gordon was suspended for an entire year, just as Martavis Bryant was. And another player that benefited from such a rule change was also Wes Welker, if you remember, who had also violated the league's substance abuse policy and had his suspension reduced. So some of this had gone down from 4 games to 3 games and then an appeal to 2. So maybe the league either shoots high knowing it'll get lowered, or the players really do think that they had won over or got one over on the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell. And if they do believe that, they have to be a little bit smarter to know that the very next time coming around, it won't be as simple as having 4 games reduced to 3 and then reduced to 2. They might be gone, and it all depends on how many tests were levied, how many tests may have been missed, tests failed for whatever reason. I guess in Martavis Bryant's situation, it was multiple tests that cost him the 2016 season, which is rather unfortunate if you fail more than one, having not learned the very first time. Now, amidst all this, it is almost like a deja vu situation where Bell is once again recovering. He recovered from that injury, came into the 2015 season, and then was hurt in November once again by a Cincinnati Bengal, this time Vontaze Burfict, as I had mentioned earlier, and he was immediately placed on injured reserve the very next day. So, could we be seeing history repeat itself again if Le'Veon Bell skipped a drug test? I would say I would be very disappointed to see if Le'Veon Bell had skipped a drug test, just based on having a teammate who had gone through very similar situations with Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant suspended the first 4 games of 2015 for violating the substance abuse policy. And then just here in March, about 3 months almost to the day, Bryant had been suspended. So if this had happened or had occurred, it would be very disappointing to know that you had someone, I mean, I'm not going to say he's very close. They may not be very close friends, but that's at least someone within your immediate football family that had gone through this already. So I would be disappointed if, one, Le'Veon Bell actually has used marijuana, a banned substance in the NFL, knowing that he shouldn't be using it. I would be disappointed if, 2, he did skip a drug test, knowing that skipping a test is also pretty much admitting fault and, of course, an automatic failure. But I would be equally as disappointed with Mark Madden, a Pittsburgh guy, who's going to go out and sensationalize something like this for his own benefit. I don't feel that that is a good thing to be doing, especially if you care about your local hometown sports. If you're going to be the one to go out and say this, I am going to say that Mark Madden does not care about the Pittsburgh Steelers or Le'Veon Bell. Why would you break this news when practically no one else had said anything about it anywhere? Even the guys who crawl out from under a rock, the ones we all know who their names are that say things about Ben Roethlisberger and Todd Haley not having a good relationship, and about Ben Roethlisberger getting potentially traded or being on a trade block several years ago. Also poor timing doing that at about 9 or 10 a.m. before a 1 o'clock kickoff on a Sunday morning and afternoon. Mark Madden is somebody that's always been under my skin. It even goes back to him intentionally trying to be under your skin as sort of a villain if you were one that watched World Championship Wrestling, also known as WCW, back in those late 90s and early 2000s, and Mark jumps aboard there as kind of their color guy, and it wasn't even much entertaining as he was very kind of tasteless even back then. And so I've always had a bad taste in my mouth from him, not only ruining the wrestling experience, but also ruining the just football experience from time to time, saying some of the things he says to get attention. Now, Le'Veon Bell came right back out and addressed Mark Madden's words, and he was interviewed, at least according to Pittsburgh Tribune Review's Mark Cabali, and quoted as saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." He says, "I am fine. I haven't missed any drug test, failed any drug test. I can't keep talking about the drug test. I probably already said too much about it, so I really can't keep talking about it. People are going to say what they want to say on the internet. It is people who really have nothing to do. I don't get upset or let it bother me." So he takes a jab at Mark Madden by saying people are going to say what they want on the internet. Well, of course, I'm saying it right now. But Mark Madden comes right back and he has to say, and this isn't even 2 hours later, it's a full hour later, and says, "Everyone believes that Lev Bell is telling the truth, huh? Okay." So either Mark Madden's source is practically bulletproof, or he just has that much of an ego and is hard-headed and won't admit fault. And hey, we've all been there. Some of us were taking some second or third hand advice or news about Brandon Boykin. We still don't know what's true there, but we do know at least, once again, where there's smoke, there's fire. NFL teams have kind of been avoiding Brandon Boykin like the plague. By the same manner here, I don't know if you can trust what Mark Madden is saying, but at the same time, having known Le'Veon Bell had gotten in trouble before, that maybe Juice might be in a little bit of trouble here. So the thing is, I love how Le'Veon Bell says, "I can't keep talking about the drug test. I probably already said too much about it, so I can't keep talking about it." And there's no coincidence as to why he's been saying this, because if you recall, about 4 months ago, James Harrison recorded a random drug testing experience, and he tried to do it again. And he was posting these videos over to Instagram. In the first, it showed James Harrison arguing and some voice on the video, and they were talking about his tests, and they were testing for like performance enhancing drugs or PEDs. Okay. And Harrison, I guess, has his phone out, and the voice tells him, and this is what was quoted or reported, "If you're not going to put the camera away, I can't test you." And I guess what that would mean is you can't record the testing or talk about the testing process, because there's actually something that is in the NFL and NFL Players Association's joint drug testing policy that says a player who fails to cooperate fully in the testing process as determined by the medical advisor or provides a dilute specimen will be treated as having a positive test result. So, in other words, if that doctor got on his high horse that day, or they feel that recording or being uncooperative in the process, that specific person administering that test, whatever, I'm not sure the exact term, if you want to say a physician or medical, they say medical advisor here, but whoever is administering that test pretty much says, hey, don't record. You can't record. Or they're just going to label you as a positive test result, which positive meaning you fail, and then you're going to face some sort of suspension and or fine for failing for performance enhancing drugs or substance abuse, which are both policies according to the NFL themselves and their Players Association. They have this collective bargaining agreement, that these terms to which these players must agree to. And one of those terms is, it doesn't really matter if Colorado has marijuana being illegal. It is pretty much illegal across the other 50 states in the nation. I think we're somewhere between 2 and 4 states that have actually legalized that. Kind of lost count. I think Washington being the other one, just because of the jokes about Seattle and Denver in the Super Bowl. And Mile High Stadium, of course, some sponsors trying to rename since Sports Authority went out of business. You have some of these marijuana growers or suppliers or whatever it be trying to get the naming rights for Mile High Stadium to build in. Joke, of course, wink, wink. So anyways, the coincidence being Le'Veon Bell is actually smart enough to not say too much about this testing process, knowing that the way the league has been operating doesn't seem to be much of a coincidence when it comes to at least the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think we've all felt that way for a very long time as far as suspensions, whether that be somebody like James Harrison for, say, a helmet hit, or just going after players for substance abuse, or even players who weren't officially charged with a crime, as was the case with Ben Roethlisberger. I think all of us has felt the brunt of that. It has pretty much been that way for this decade so far, since 2010 or so, maybe even just a little bit before that, the last even 10 years, but really just recently since Goodell's got in there. He really does feel like a dictator, and you're in his sandbox. You must play by his rules. And the other funny thing is many of you may recall, Le'Veon Bell had sent a tweet out on April 20th, which is April being the 4th month of the year, 420, which is a euphemism or kind of a symbolic of an unofficial marijuana smoking holiday. Well, coincidence or not, April 20th is the date that the NFL opens its annual drug testing window. So these players start getting tested on April 20th, and it begins on 420, the unofficial stoner holiday. And the players can start being drug tested, and, it's almost like this is too good to be true, but you can't make this stuff up. So Le'Veon Bell tweets out on that day, of course I get a random drug test on 420. Good luck with that sample. And it almost seems like the news that came out today, practically 2 months later here, and it seems like this news is just like more of the same. And I do believe under the policy, when you have already failed or been caught, like Lev Bell had been with possession of marijuana, that you are now under the microscope of being tested more times and more frequently. So this is, of course, hot news to just the placement of everyone being high on the Pittsburgh sports and all the titles and trophies and everything else. And then also piggybacking on Le'Veon Bell's aspiring rapper career. Le'Veon Bell has been putting out these rap songs on SoundCloud and maybe a few other places. He's been tweeting it, and he's been working on being a rapper. And in working on being with a rapper, he's been hanging out with someone who's been a highly critical fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers as of late, posts some videos on social media all the time, and of course I'm talking about Snoop Dogg. Snoop Doggy Dogg, Snoop Lion, whatever you may know him as. Snoop Dogg if he is in fact hanging around with Le'Veon Bell to rub elbows with a Pittsburgh Steelers player and get a little bit of insight to the inside of the organization or whatever, that's all cool. I really don't have a problem with it. And as I was discussing with some other people, Martha Stewart has probably a worse rap sheet and spent maybe more time in jail and prison and whatnot than Snoop Dogg has. It's kind of the perception is a reality. One guy talks about drugs and gangsters and a certain lifestyle with violence and whatnot. Also comes from maybe, a rough neighborhood as far as my understanding of his background and what he talks about and what his image is. And the reason that image could be bad for Le'Veon Bell to be hanging around is because Snoop Dogg has been arrested I don't know how many times for possession of various narcotics and different drugs. And I mean, the guy says, he's part of songs that say smoke weed every day practically, right? So of course, when people hear that he's hanging around with this kind of icon, with this certain label or image to him, that perception almost becomes reality and you become guilty by associating with said people. Now, whether that be true or not, we're really making some reaches on what Snoop Dogg does in his personal life, his lifestyle, and behind closed doors. And I'm not one that's going to criticize that one way or the other. I believe you're free to do what you want to do, provided it doesn't hurt someone else, of course, within reason. Snoop Dogg, if he is the big fan of the Steelers that he claims to be, should know the perception and image that follows him, that carries with his name and being in his presence. And the reason I say this is he should know better that if someone like Le'Veon Bell is indeed hanging around with them, and if Snoop decides to light up a joint right there in maybe his palatial mansion living room, sitting on whatever couches he has that costs probably more than my house, who knows? And maybe he knows better than to pass puff with Le'Veon Bell, because why would you want Le'Veon Bell for a single moment to be around that type of environment that could get him in trouble and therefore hurt the football team, the very football team that you claim to love, the same one that you become passionate about every time they lose and criticize certain coaches such as Todd Haley? And that's okay. People are allowed to be passionate. People are allowed to question where they will question. I'm sure you'll hear a lot more questioning from me. It's a lot harder to be positive after a loss. A lot more to be positive with a win, even if with that win, it being much more ugly. And maybe the loss is more luck from the team that ended up winning, maybe with the field goal at the end. So you always have good and bad. Sometimes the games with the W's, you don't always have the best of things going on. But Snoop Dogg is going on his Instagrams or on his Twitter accounts, and he's talking about the Steelers. And if you're such a big fan, Snoop Dogg, and I really doubt you would hear this and this would come through the pipeline. And hey, no ill words from me, really. I am a fan of Snoop Dogg's work. Believe that or not. I remember when he came out on Dr. Dre's album in 1992, and he came out with his own album in 1993, and I had those CDs. My kid won't know what CDs are. It's pretty funny to think about that, but I had those. But Snoop, if you really care about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think you do, I really do, I believe that you do, look out for this young man. Pick up the phone. Just let Le'Veon Bell live his life here. He may have anywhere from 6 to 10 years in this league. Depends on his health. We see D'Angelo Williams 32-33, so Lev Bell right now turned 24 in February. This man could have a long career with your favorite team. So steer him in the right direction, because when he retires and he's 35 or 36 and he's sitting on a mountain of millions, You two can pal around, make rap albums, and smoke all the marijuana you want. And you never know. Could be legal by then, too. So you guys won't even get in trouble if you, maybe at the most a DUI. You could afford to get a driver. Get an Uber if you need to take you around town. You won't get charged with possession or whatever anymore. Think about that part of the future. Think about the future of maybe this Steelers team having a few more Lombardi trophies in the trophy case instead of living for today and just getting your high because today's 420 or today's, I don't know, June 14th and it's 4:20 p.m. Just let it go. Just be, in some ways, if you can, be a positive role model, or anybody that's out there, please steer not just Le'Veon Bell. It's just a figurative example. You could almost insert anyone's name because this seems to be an epidemic that's growing across the National Football League. This is a problem in society in general. And I think many of us are starting to realize the positives and negatives around a plant. But ladies and gentlemen, that's what I'm disappointed in. I'm disappointed with the random drug testing, the BS news that comes out, the things that are just knee-jerk reactions and not necessarily facts. So, I'm going to take Le'Veon Bell at his word. I'm going to say, just like before, he said good luck with that. I think this kid, hopefully, I don't eat my words, but I think he has a good head on his shoulders. I want to believe that he's a hard worker. He reported to minicamp. He's working out. He's dunking basketballs. He's ready to go, come back and be a force and help these Pittsburgh Steelers on their stairway to 7. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you for listening and being a supporter of the Steel City Underground podcast. Until the next time, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.